where is your homeschool going? We have to think in that last day of your homeschool, what do you want it to be like? And it's not just about content. I think parents get trapped into the which math curriculum or science or which field trips or which extracurriculars, the method at which we go about this, our example that we set, all of these are integral parts of the education.
Well, welcome back. We are so glad you're here with us. We have Lauren Gideon, the Director of Government Relations from Classical Conversations with us today. You're going to love her. Just in the little bit of conversations I've had with Lauren, I left encouraged and inspired. She is so young and yet a homeschool mom of 7 with 2 already graduated, right? And you have 1 about to be married. Oh, 2 married then.
One already.
Okay, just the first one. Anyways, it's so fun, but still active in homeschooling and obviously active in homeschool legislation. She's in fact, the way that they put it was a passionate advocate for classical education and education independence. So that's what we're going to talk about, Lauren. We are so happy that you agreed to come on. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Kashia. I love Czech and the work that you're doing there, and I've been equally inspired by just my conversations with you and the other board members and just phenomenal board and leadership that you guys have there in Colorado.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I have met you a few times. As a matter of fact, many of our listeners might have, because Lauren was a speaker at our day at the Capitol last year. She came and did part of the class. We're not really going to cover this today, but you were talking about the importance of independent funding and not falling into that trap, right? Is that, am I correct in remembering that?
A big chunk of that talk, yes.
I was running around like a chicken with their head cut off, so I did not hear your speech at all, but I've heard you in the past. So, well, let's get into it. First of all, can we just hear a little bit about your story? Tell me what led you to homeschooling and how you even came to be where you are with Classical Conversations in this role.
Excellent. Well, I'll try to give you the brief version because
that's a lot.
How I came to homeschooling is I'm the second generation homeschooler myself.
Oh, nice.
Parents started homeschooling me in 1991. And it wasn't until I was in the advocacy space that I found out that 1991 was the first year that homeschool was legally recognized in the state. And so I have a debt of gratitude to the people that came behind my family in the homeschool space, but also to my parents who did something that was very strange at that time. It was very new and fringy. And so they normalized that, the idea of homeschooling. Sometimes I coach people too through that now, but it's only been in that I have this hindsight to appreciate that my parents went before me and did that for me. So homeschooling my children was a very natural thing. Sometimes people have very, exciting stories about their calling to homeschool. And so I don't have that. In fact, I would say God would have had to show me some sort of calling to do something different because that's what I knew and was normal to me. So I started homeschooling in, my son turned 5 in 2010. So I've been homeschooling since then. We did a variety of different approaches. We didn't land in Classical Conversations till I think like 2014, which is where we just fell into it nicely. I didn't know the words of the thing I was looking for at the time, but I was integrating almost a new student every year into our homeschool since I have 7 kids and they're all very close together. And so I started looking for some sort of thing that would bring our family together in our homeschool, because thinking through various grade levels and curriculums, that was all great.
7 different lessons, forget about it. Yeah.
Pretty much impossible when you factor in that there's still only 24 hours in a day. And so we began a journey to find that, and we found that in Classical Conversations, and that's what I went for. But there's been a huge reward on that investment because my own educational experience kind of gained traction within the Classical Conversations curriculum and the structure, really, because the way that my journey went is I had a lot of kids. So figuring out how to offset my homeschooling costs was very important to me. So when there were needs that I could fill, I stepped into those roles as ways to offset those costs. So I started my first year, we were just a family and community. I went into the director role the next year. that's kind of a funny story because as most homeschool leaders know, there's a lot behind the scenes that happened. But what's visible is not so obvious. What was visible to me is that my director vacuumed, she set up tables, and I thought if that's all the role was, I could do that.
Yeah.
And then you agree to something and you find out what's actually involved.
You're like, oh my goodness. Thank you so much for what you did. Yeah.
Totally. And it was like, some people might be like upset about that, but I didn't need the whole picture of what was involved to say yes. I needed to only see a glimmer. And then because through that saying yes, I received coaching and experiences that I would not have had. And so my journey is a lot about taking on a responsibility and then growing into those shoes. And
you
then
know what? There's a lesson in that, Lauren. That's so real. Like how many times if the Lord said, hey, this is what I'm going to lay out for you your whole life, we would turn and run the other direction because it seems overwhelming. But one step we can do, right?
Absolutely. Well, and it takes such faith because sometimes you don't get to know all the details. And so maybe I don't know that there was faith or I was just blissfully ignorant, and that was fine too. But I just kept saying, where is there a need? Can I meet that need? Well, at least I'll try, because in some cases, maybe there's holes that are going to sit open unless somebody at least tries. And so I directed it. I led high school classes. I stepped into a state leadership role. And in those experiences, I got to meet some of the most, the homeschool space, the most amazing people.
I love it. You're right.
And you get to listen to kind of those veteran superstars, if you will, pour into you. The higher you kind of move up in the leadership, the more experiences and mentorship that you got. So I feel very privileged to grow up in the CC leadership and the state leadership. And it's through those opportunities and then homeschooling my kids that I actually found, what do I want to be when I grow up? Right? Like,
yeah, I know. I still joke with the young adults that say that. I go, I don't know, what do I want to be when I grow up? I mean, it is ever evolving, right?
It is, because you don't know what you don't know. And so learning about both, the content of education. So my niche, what I love is a history and kind of the history of our country, and not just the we would call the founding of our country, but what set the stage for that. There's like
even before, right,
hundreds of years, or even back to it's what makes Roman history and Greek history interesting to me is that's kind of like the family tree of where classical liberalism came from, and to retrace those roots. I love it. And so it was like, where does the rubber meet the road? So it was in 2020, and I have a passion for these things. Our country looks a little bit messy post 2020 elections, and it was like, well, what are you going to do about it? Because I feel very deeply, we can talk about that later, that we're something everybody's supposed to do. And so for us, it was like, well, we've figured out homeschooling our children, but what does it mean to take education outside of our homeschool community to our community at large? Because education, to me, is the single way to preserve these ideas that founded our country. And so another homeschool family and my family started community education classes where we would teach founding documents, pre-founding documents. And we did that for 4 years. So that was just another way. That's a part of how I got to the role I am now, but I didn't know that. I was just trying to be faithful with the conviction that I had at the time.
Right.
Meanwhile, my role in CC changed, and eventually I kind of grew out of it into a place where I was sitting in limbo with how I'm serving within classical conversations. I also, during that time, was able to help serve in a U.S. Senate campaign, just got my feet a little bit more wet in that way. And then classical conversations opened up the role of Director of Government Relations, which is where I sit, but it's the culmination of all my passions, because education is a huge, it completely revolutionized the way I think in my worldview. And I do believe that is an essential element for bringing a biblical worldview to our culture and our country. So education, and then the political advocacy side, this responsibility to steward the that we've been given. And so to combine those, that's why I sit where I sit. And that's where I'm very thrilled.
It's so clear that you're passionate about it. And it's so easy to see in hindsight sometimes what the Lord was doing. Like you said, well, I was doing this and this, and this is all sort of tied together. But when you're in the middle of it and looking forward, that's what requires that faith, like you said. So that was great. I love that story. Thank you for sharing it. Well, let's get into that part then, the advocacy, because Lauren has been a guest at what we call an Alliance conference. It's a conference that we do with state support organizations through the nation that are faith-based, that still believe in parent-directed home discipleship that's free from government control. So Lauren has come and she is so eloquent and I love it. So I'm very happy to dig into this, but I would love to hear from your perspective because you live in Iowa, but you get to go all over the nation. Is there something that you're seeing that is like, hey, we've got to engage? This is important. What are you seeing? Is there a theme? What's going on?
Yeah, in the homeschool space, there seems to be two major themes. I think both sides of the aisle have a perspective on how they want to influence, I'll say, the homeschooling community. So the themes, I would say, are most obvious on, from my perspective, is one side of the aisle wants to kind of take this jurisdiction by force. They would say it's their responsibility. Children are their responsibility. Education is their responsibility. Therefore, they're just going to claim that territory and say, thing, what you're doing, the children and their education belongs to us. So we're going to own and regulate that. Because they think they have the right to do that. And I would say the other side of the aisle is kind of what you referenced earlier. They might see and recognize what we're doing as something amazing and want to help. I guess both sides want to help. And so
it's so true, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. And so I would say, well, one side wants to take a territory by force. The other side would like to buy the territory. And so we have to be very vigilant to realize that that's what's happening, because either way, ownership will shift from the independent private family and to the state, by which means it doesn't really matter, because either way we lose the right and authority to govern our family's education as God has given it to us.
Yeah. You know what? This is I think the most important thing that's happening in the homeschool movement, because it's become, like you said, there was a time when it was like, whoa, what are you doing? It was super weird. You had to like not go out of your house during school hours just because of all the red flags. We're not in that anymore. Now it's like almost cool to be homeschooler. And that does open up the door and that help. For those of you who are just listening, Lauren did like the air quotes on help, because this is where I see, and I agree with you, the like unintended consequences of help, where it's like, no, don't help. How about you just let us be? That's really helpful. And then I hear, how do you handle that when you're talking to families that say, well, no, I want the help? I mean, that's kind of going into the funding, I think, but
that's okay. You know, I love history and stuff, but you can't unavoidably, this goes into the realm of economics and history. And one of the key pillars of an independent society for a liberty-based society is this idea of private property. And so you have to take into account, you have to inventory what it is that God gave me and that I want to retain ownership for, and what am I willing to surrender and give away to somebody else. And so the help question, I feel like, is like very much downstream. And it's because we haven't addressed these questions of ownership, of governance, of sovereignty. And we have to wrestle with those first, because we have to know what it is, the thing that we are selling. And so in my space, the thing that we're trying to kind of propagate is this idea that family education is precious and it's sacred and it's so special that it's not really something I want outside investors in. Right. I really to maintain my ownership. And this idea of liberty is a long legacy within our country, and it has a cost. And we live in this rich environment where we have this historical narrative of people that were willing to sacrifice for liberty. Some people have, lived through hard times. Some people have had family members that have served in our military. Some people have paid the ultimate sacrifice. And so we think about maintaining liberty has a cost, and we think of this help coming in the form of money. It's very easy to me to understand that leaving that money on the table is the sacrifice that this time and place has called me to make. And that's the idea I want to share with people. Isn't that to be prideful and being like, oh, we don't need help. It's not about that. It's what you have is precious. And it's our turn to take our place, to sacrifice, to maintain the freedom that we've been given.
I love the way you're phrasing that, because this is our opportunity to make a sacrifice for that fight for freedom. I think, I don't want to make this whole thing about funding, obviously, but it's the biggest thing I think that we're fighting in this homeschool world. And to not condemn anybody who's like, I want this, but to educate people on what they're giving up. I hate that I'm going to ask you to try to rethink what you just said, but the way you phrase that, I don't think that we, in general, understand it, that what you're giving up, what that freedom is costing, what's the price to be paid. And how do you start that conversation with somebody who just doesn't get it? Because honestly, Lauren, when I'm meeting a lot of new homeschoolers, which is what I do generally, I'm out and about and I'm talking to people who are just considering it or just starting. A lot of it is like, on Monday we go here, on Tuesday we go here. Like, they're outsourcing all these things, which in one way is kind of cool because that did not exist when I was around. Like, this a la carte education, whatever you need, it is available. Really, it is. But how do you express like, but there's a better way, there's a richer way? Do you have any advice on that, on those conversations?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. One is just, I would say, considering your commission. Like, where did it come from? Who gave you the commission?
Okay.
And whose approval are you looking for? My favorite parable of all time, and if anybody knows me, they know this. It's the parable of the 10 talents, or the talents. I don't know why I say 10, but where the master hands out talents, or I call them resources, in groups of 5 to one and 2 to the other and 1, and they have to. The master wants some sort of
investment. Yep.
So they're sitting there. First, they have to count. So they have to name all of the things that God's given to us. And sometimes I don't think we appropriately list, what has God given me a responsibility for? And then who is going to give an account for those things? I think that's really important. So for me, the things that are obvious to me in this conversation is my family's education is given to me and my husband, and we're the only 2 people that are going to give an account. And so there's not going to be a clause when I stand before the master at the end of the story and to say, like, give an account for how you spent things, or use this investment, or reinvested what I gave you. There's not going to be, well, the government didn't give me enough money, or they intervened and they got my business so I can blame them, or their standards or their regulations weren't high enough. Like, the sole accountability for how I leverage that thing that God has given me is between, me and my husband and God. And so we have to think about, you know, what things has he given us ownership and then responsibility for. That's how we get to the idea of rights, which is, I know, a different conversation, but what we have,
but it's foundational. I love it. Yeah.
What we have a responsibility for, we have this right then to govern and invest. Right. So the second part of that, evaluation thing is, where is your homeschool going? We have to think, in that last day of your homeschool, what do you want it to be like? And it's not just about content. I think parents get trapped into the which math curriculum or science or which field trips or which extracurriculars. It's not. It's our life, the method at which we go about this, our example that we set. All of these are integral parts of the education. And so when you participate in programs, that communicates something. And so if you say, well, education is a responsibility of the state, therefore we accept the state's program it's a complete, you're adopting a worldview along with that content, and you're then enculturating the next generation, again, not just with the content, but the method, and the method becomes the message. Yeah. And so we wonder why in our country we're very confused about these things. It's because we have 100+ years.
We've all been indoctrinated.
The method has the message, and so we've propagated ideas like this is the state's job. The state owns the educational space, and it has completely changed the direction of our country.
Right. Yeah. No, that's good. And you're right. Boy, I love that you went deeper. It was like, I'm not going to give you the surface level answer. Let's just talk about the foundational questions that you have to ask. I mean, you have the parable. I am a broken record on we're here for such a time as this, the Esther and Mordecai, when her uncle says, who knows if you're not here for such a time as this? And I love that, because we are. And what's the purpose? What are the good works that God prepared beforehand? It might just be your family. And which is so funny, because we undervalue that. Like, culturally, that's a whole other topic too. Moms feel like their stay-at-home life or their homeschool mom thing is so devalued in our culture, but it's the most significant thing you can do with your life, I think. So
Yes.
anyway,
Agree.
sorry. I love it. That to me was a little bit of preaching to the choir, I hope, but also just giving somebody pause and going, yes, this is a commission. This is my duty. I love it. So good. Well, let's get into we started talking about the people who are helping. Are there some unintended consequences that you have seen? Any examples of that play out? Of the helpers?
Well, it's coming from both sides, right? There's people that are helping, and their argument is we have to keep children safe and we have to keep eyes on them. And
Right.
well, from that sphere, what we're seeing is a complete disparaging of the ideas that are fundamental to freedom. And so this is, I think, you just brought up Esther. So there are states in our country that are facing this in real time right now, where they have there for such a time as this moment. It's really one of those talents too. Like, we have the resources, we have our homeschool, we have our freedom. We also have opportunities in time that won't last forever. And how we navigate those crises or opportunities is a resource that we've been given. And so taking that all into account, the things that are on trial right now are so much bigger than homeschooling. In our country, we have a justice system predicated on the presumption of innocence, due process of law. You have to have reasonable cause before you invade somebody's private space. All of those things are slowly being chiseled away under the banner of safety. We have this jurisdiction or this responsibility to come make sure that children are safe. And, it's always under the guise of something good, because who doesn't want safe children? I mean, I think that's maybe the biggest catalyst sometimes for families to homeschool.
I know they use this word that sounds like, oh, what's wrong with that? Yes.
So I think the unintended consequences on that space, where the state says, in the name of safety, we're going to come usurp our boundaries and tiptoe into yours. It's going to be the gradual disparaging of those big ideas that built the foundations of our country. And so that's why, that issue specifically is not a homeschooling issue. Anybody that values freedom, I think there's Second Amendment groups, there's bodily autonomy groups. Everybody right now needs to be paying attention to the freedom issue within the homeschool movement, because in the name of safety, all boundaries and protection can be discouraged and eradicated.
Overreach. Yeah, absolutely.
And then on the other side of the help, it's an economic issue. We have a free market space in which you and we all operate. Now we've entered into voluntary agreements and transactions with people to provide services and content for our homeschools. And as that market begins to be bought up by state entities, we're going to see the same thing happen to the state, to the education market that has happened to the healthcare market. And people are not actually, they're well aware that there's so much bloat in the bureaucracy and the costs and inflations related to healthcare. Why? Because our government got into the healthcare business. And once we do that, we have these false markets that are artificially inflated, and costs are insane. And also just the quality of service, right? And so that's a very obvious one that we're starting to see, is just the inflation. Those are the practical things, but it's still the worldview thing. I think we cannot explain that enough, because some of these are tangible, but the intangible ways that this affects the next generation in the paradigm that we hand off to them is who provides for you. Is it God provides for you? Do fathers take care of their families? Do we together to work hard and trust God with this, or do the state to take care of our problems? That's a worldview issue, not just economics.
You are so right. And I love the way you phrase that. Homeschooling and parental rights are tied at the hip, but it's not just impacting homeschoolers. So I love the way you said that. Whatever happens with the homeschoolers, it's coming in, right?
Matters, because it's just these idea of jurisdiction and spheres of authority that we have to, I think we have to be wise and discerning, because otherwise it's like words like safety, right, that come in and confuse us, because who doesn't want that? Right. And so understanding God gave certain responsibilities to the state, certain responsibilities to the family, and which we haven't even addressed yet, is certain responsibilities to the church. And each one of those has a commissioning to execute the thing that God has called them to do. And if one person steps out of their lane, the thing eventually breaks down. I like to call it trespassing, because that's a legal term. When you have gone into a space that God didn't give for you, that belongs to something else, you trespass into their space. So parental rights is, it's derived from this idea that God gave children to their parents. We have plenty of scripture to kind of substantiate this paradigm that parents are to train their children up, that teach these things when you walk along the way. That now then our practical application is there's no scriptures that indicate that the state has a responsibility to do that. And so we get this paradigm, and then we're building practical philosophy around those. So to your point, this isn't just something of the homeschooling movement. A lot of parents and I would say society beyond that are asking questions of parental rights. Who do they come from? What are the threats against them? I think that's another place we go to, because especially in Colorado, a very popular issue in the last year was the rights of the child, which again, another nice sounding word.
It sounds so innocuous. Totally.
Right. But if the government's role is to secure rights, to protect rights, they have they're building an argument to say that actually then the role of protecting the children belongs from the state, and incidentally comes away from the parent. And so we have to be very careful that actually we maintain that, and that when the state is to step in, we follow the ideals that our country is predicated on. Like, there's a reasonable cause. We have a due process of law. Parents are presumed innocent until proven guilty. And I think as homeschoolers, we have to come to terms with the fact that we live in a fallen world and bad things happen. And as far as I can tell, there's really no way to stop
evil,
the consequences of the fall in society. And so how are we going to come to terms with the fact that the state does have a role to come in? It's Romans says the state does not bear the sword in vain. And so they have a place to step in when a crime has happened against somebody else, when rights are forfeited. At that point, the state has a responsibility to uphold justice and to step in those situations.
No, I agree. Yeah, we can't have anarchy, everybody doing their own thing. We do have, I love our system, right? Like you said, the basis of
due process.
Due process. That was the word. Thank you. Due process.
Wow.
Yes. Well, okay. So just for our average listener, is a homeschool mom, for her who feels like I am busy, I am doing my schooling. This is for somebody else. What is your encouragement? How do we, as the average homeschool mom, make a difference? What can we do in this basically war, I think, against family?
Well, I'm going to back up, not before we get to what, and say why we should do anything.
Okay.
I think I love you. Your moms are probably your audience, and that's fair. But I don't want to exclude dads in this case.
Sure, right.
In the space of advocacy, I think we have to come to terms with what you said, average mom. What is the average American's responsibility in the advocacy space? And one thing I start with thinking about rights and responsibilities. Who has been given the responsibility to govern, let's just say Colorado, to govern the state of Colorado? And so if we go to Colorado state constitution, your section 1, vestment of political power, says all political power is vested in and derived from the people. All government of right originates from the people, is founded upon their will only, and is instituted solely for the good of the whole. So if we think about this through Romans 13:1 talks about how God establishes governments. We have been given a government where the highest power in our states and in our country is the people. The people have crown, right? So if we think about the sovereign of our country, each one of us share in wearing that role and then that responsibility. And so it's not a question of if I should govern my state. Well, it's a question of how are you governing your state, because you already wear this crown. You already are the sovereign in our country. And so if God has given you this resource and this talent of a society governed by the people, we will give an account for how we ruled, right?
What do you do with that talent he gave you? Boy, you're right. That's a really great parable that ties into so much of life.
Everything. Well,
Yeah.
and so our favorite state motto is South Dakota, and this is under God, the people rule. And if the people of God, the way that we rule well is by living in subjugation to the authority of Christ and then exercising our political will responsibly, faithfully to what God has called us to do. And so I would say, why first? Because you as the average people of Colorado are plan A for governing the state of Colorado and for our country. And there is no plan B. This is God's system of government that he has established for the time being. And there is.
Preach. I love it.
So why is because I would say you have an obligation. God gave it to you. It's a commissioning. And we have to be faithful with and be obedient with the thing that he's given to us.
Okay.
Now, the what? Geesh. How are you going to do that is it's a daunting task. And I think we should enter into that governing role with sobriety because we have a high calling. And so, but it's daunting to your point, right? So first we have to take ownership of the weight of this thing. And then we have to break it down into manageable ways that we can say, well, how do I move the needle? I go back to my parents that move the needle in the homeschooling thing to me. And then they set me up to take the baton and go further. Which, hopefully by God's grace, I can go 1 degree more. And I think we can apply that to our civic responsibility is first identifying where am I at and what is 1% better that I could do. This is actually, so my day job, this director of government relations, is a big part of that because we have you on our website, chooseeducationindependence.com. We have these 4 pillars that we're trying to, is education. We have to know what it is that we have. Take inventory. What is education independence and our role here? But the other part of that is we do a lot with civics because the problem that you're asking is widespread. Civics has not been a part of widespread education in a long time. And so how do we exercise the role of sovereign within our representative republic? It's a valid question. And so every month in my group, we take one bite-sized activity to say, how do we move the needle? And so, for example, like step 1 might be call and meet your representative. They're a human. They're made in the image of God. They have problems and happinesses and sadnesses, and just get to know them as people because they are your representation.
And they're still people. I love how you started, by the way. I didn't even address that, how you said there's 2 sides and you have to believe both are coming at it with a good intention. I mean, let's just start there. Wow. I'm sorry. Rabbit trail.
Nobody even goes into politics unless they think that they have some good.
They're going to make a difference. Right.
Right. They have some good in mind. We'll know whether it's, goodness is something we're discerning at all times, but they have some good that they think they can accomplish. Finding out what that thing is, finding common ground, I think is step 1 kind of in inserting yourself into the mechanism of governance. And then read your state constitution. That's a great place to start. It's not that horribly long. And there's so many rich truths packed in those first, usually 10 amendments that are great conversation starters because we have to propagate these ideas, which were once alive and well, that we don't.
They're not common now, right?
Right. The responsibility that's been placed upon us. So those are 2 ways, but I would say still, if people are looking for more ways to figure out what's my +1, what's my next 1% better, our education independence monthly seminars are a great place to plan.
We will link that in the show notes for sure.
And then there's that accountability and community base to that because it's hard and this is foreign, this is new. And so a place to check in and to discuss, these activities with like-minded people is proving to be a great place for us all to kind of grow our civic IQ.
Yeah, I love it. I hate that this is such a short podcast because we're just digging into some things. Lauren, you're a delight, really inspiring for me. Anyways, I hope the listeners also feel the same. I'm sure they do. So I hate to cut us off, but let's close out how we do every podcast interview. Could you leave us with your best homeschool tip? What would you say if you were going to talk to a brand new homeschooler?
I love that. When I think about homeschooling, I really think it's about lifelong learning and raising the next generation of disciples. And so to me, the best, most convicting advice that I have, because I'm so convicted about it, is trying to live out and be the person that I want my children to grow into. And that keeps me humble and sober, and
yes, gives us lots of opportunity to demonstrate grace.
growing myself. So that would be my one tip.
I love it. So good. Thank you. Well, Lauren, I'm going to link, tell me the website.
So the website is www.chooseeducationindependence.com.
Yes.
And if you go to the Join Us page, there is a form to fill out to get signed up for our newsletters and then those monthly education independence seminar calls where we can continue this conversation.
I love it. So good. And I know this is not going to be the last time we hear from you. So thank you for being here. Thanks for the audience for taking time of your day to be with us too. Thank you so much for joining us today. The Colorado Homeschool Podcast is a ministry of Christian home educators of Colorado. We have been motivating parents to disciple the next generation by embracing home discipleship that is Christ-centered, parent-directed, and free from government control. We invite you to join us in this mission. If you want to support homeschooling in Colorado, go to check.org/donate. In the meantime, share this with your friends and make sure you subscribe. That really helps us. Thank you.
Brought to you by thepodcastupload.com, empowering faith-driven voices.